We often talk about the best build, the right game, or player and GM tips and tricks to run and play tabletop role playing games better. And those are all super duper important. But there is a topic less discussed. I believe the style of play for a GM is super important when discussing a GM's position. Do you prefer a more historical game or a silly game? Do you like wargamers, or are you more go with the flow kind of style? All of these styles are valid ways to GM and all exist on a spectrum of GM play styles. No one playstyle is inherently better than the other. This is not a hard science after all. It really does depend on one's comfortability and the skills of the GM and what they bring to the table. So, today I'm going to be unpacking several GM styles, as well as games you might enjoy and the weaknesses that come with each of these styles. The Thinker. This GM is the quintessential person who loves everything investigation and mystery. They read Sherlock Holmes, they love escape rooms, they have a hyperfixation on traps, and love problem solving. Ultimately, tabletop role-playing games for them are more of a test of solving and uncovering mysteries, solving puzzles, and problem solving. These GMs will gravitate towards, obviously, investigation and mystery games. They enjoy games likely with dungeon crawling, but specifically dungeons with lots of traps, puzzles, and even riddles. These GMs love the thrill of seeing their players solve fun mysteries and unravel them through the mechanics and/or narrative of the game. However, the biggest problem, I think, with these GMs is that they likely excel at puzzles and creating them, but they might not realize that these puzzles only have one solution, and that can really halt the game and make it really not fun. No player wants to sit there for an hour or more trying to figure out a single puzzle and the game grinds to a major halt. So, in this case, I think the Thinker needs to take that into account when they're running their games and create multiple solutions to their problems. So, I think the best games for this are Gumshoe and Brindlewood Bay, which I've read a little bit about. The Roleplayer. Maybe you don't care for investigation. Maybe you're the GM who loves to submerge themselves into their NPC or character. They study their personality, know how to voice act, and or generally are comfortable with roleplay. This is the roleplayer. The GM will usually present information always in roleplay and not as often out of character. NPCs will also have various and wide characterizations. This could look like different personalities, outfits, and other extra bits the GM really adds to these NPCs or characters. Plus, the GM likely gives loads of time and or bonuses / benefits to players who get into character very well. So, character development and character arcs are super important and are worked into the GM's game, likely if they are a role player. Example, if you're playing a fighter who's searching for their lost sibling, the GM will likely include that into the game and then want you to roleplay that character arc out. However, the big problem for the role player is their hyperfixation on roleplay. This means the game will likely not be as crunchy, and for some players, that might not be something they want. Also, heavy and long-winded roleplaying can halt the game and or steal the spotlight from players who are less roleplay focused and or are better at certain other skills. So I recommend, if you are a role player, you try to give some spotlight to other players who are not as good at role-playing or who might be uncomfortable with the thought of role-playing. And I think example games that would work really well are Alice is Missing, Icarus, and Fiasco. The Historian. This GM, unlike the others, love historical periods and includes them in their games. These games are likely going for a more serious tone to match said historical period. The game will also stress real-world rule variations of supernatural or arcana-related abilities, effects, and concepts taking a back burner. That means you are, if you're playing especially a fantasy game, are going to be playing a low magic campaign or one-shot. Historians, and to an extent folks who want to emulate historical events in their tabletop role-playing games, will focus especially on realism in the context of their game. For instance, if you're playing an OSR tabletop role-playing game that is based strongly off the American Revolution, the GM will include rules especially for combat to match that. That means there's going to be rules for muskets, small swords, holster pistols, and mass combat are going to take precedent. The problem is these GMs will get bogged down by the tedious historical bits and baubles. This focus on quote-unquote real will likely forego speed and elegance for the sake of being historically accurate, even though it likely isn't. So players looking for a more chill game might want to go elsewhere, and plus, if you aren't a historical buff, this game might not be good for you, since you might not get the references. I think a good example of these games would be Good Society, the Jane Austen role-playing game, or Pendragon, to name a few. The Clown. Whereas the historian revels in their historical knowledge, the clown lives in the silly and unbelievable. The game is likely a single joke or a variety of jokes, or just a very silly, gimmicky time with loads of puns, slapstick humor, and/or political commentary alongside some comedic commentary. This means NPCs act like they're in a sitcom. They reoccur, and the situations they are put in are ludicrous, and the players are the ones driving the puns, the jokes, and the laughter. Monsters/antagonists act and behave like cartoon characters. Adventures are satirical parodies of contemporary culture. Characters have pompous personalities, and likely they're going to be jokes built upon other jokes. The problem with these GMs is these goofy games are not going to be serious, and for the players, they might find these jokes repetitive and/or tacky. Or the players might want something that is more grounded or more serious rather than the entire game being one entire long-running joke. It is best then to discuss with everyone if this is the GM style they prefer or if they want something more serious and grounded. Example games could look like Paranoia, Flabbergasted, or Toons RPG. The Novelist. The Novelist is a GM style that revolves around the GM using the game as an avenue or inspiration for their next book. They use the PCs to write the scenes for their next novel. This means the game will usually have a wonderfully written out plot and gripping themes that are clear from start to finish. Descriptions of areas and scenes will feel cinematic and epic like an awesome fantasy novel or a dreary LA noir book. The GM is also likely great at running modules and especially capturing the emotions of particular scenes. They would likely get along very well with the planner GM style. A good example of this, I think, is any great D&D module. In my case, I'm thinking of Ravenloft 1st Edition with its evocative description and language, as you can see up here. The problem, I think, is that the Novelist has a big railroading problem. If you aren't comfortable with being railroaded, then this might not be the right game for you. This style, I think, is most successful when the players are okay with linear story or where the players are in the fringes of the story and are just experiencing it. I think good games that work are honestly solo journaling games, and there's plenty of them. The Wargamer. This style throws out fluff and description and goofiness for good old mass combat and miniature lovers. And unlike other GM styles, combat is not done for roleplay or for the sake of it being funny. Conflict exists to offer strategic challenge and opportunities for military and strategic problem solving. This means the GM does not like freeform and wants to make sure everything is rules is written to the best of their ability. And if the rules are vague, they will get along very well with a rules lawyer. The problem with this style of gaming is because of its limited appeal. There's a reason why there aren't nearly as many wargamers, or the popularity of it isn't as, well, there anymore. The heavy focus on strategic combat, rules as written, and focus on miniatures will not be a lot of players' first interest. Plus, players and GMs then need to discuss upfront that the game is not a war game, because unlike other styles, I think this one is not one that you can easily transition to if you start a game like this. Good examples of the wargamer for games is Lancer, Mech Warrior, or GURPS Mass Combat, or D&D 4e. The Political Gamer. If you don't care for wargaming, then maybe you might be the political gamer. This style of GMing involves the characters dealing with a web of intrigue, rival factions, and political struggles barring for power in their game. The GM emphasizes factions and what these factions mean for the players in the game. There's often a focus on a bombastic and huge drama, too. This could look like a court drama or a heated debate, and the game's emphasis on witty dialogue, backstabbing, and investigating other factions while vying for control. I think the big problem, though, is this game's politics can make the game drag and feel stagnant when it's not the focus. Furthermore, these games are likely really hard for the GM and player, especially when they're in several factions, characters, plot points, and interests are all being weaved into the game's narrative. All of this bookkeeping can and will likely slog down your game, so it's really important to take lots of notes and to be upfront about the investment of time in this kind of game. Example games that might work are Drama System, Legend of the Five Rings, or Reign. The All-Rounder. Maybe you are none of these styles. Maybe you love role-playing but also love tactical combat. Maybe you love to run political games or several webs and factions, but all the factions are just inside jokes that you and your friends have created together. You would be the all-rounder, the master of none, but skilled in some or all of these styles in some way. And here is the awesome thing. You should not just label yourself as one of these styles unless it really does apply to you. These are not rigid labels, and this is certainly not a binary. GMing and hosting tabletop role-playing games are a fun hobby, and all players and GMs have these skills within them. So rather than looking at your style as something on a binary, I like to see it as a Venn diagram and or a spectrum of prescribers that you can give yourself. You could be great at role-playing, getting into character, and also be someone who's a heavy planner and relies heavily on pre-written material. That does not make you a bad GM. What you should do is have a heart-to-heart and define that style for the players so they know what they're getting into when they start playing games with you. What I do think makes the all-rounder then a style is that they can be flexible with any of the styles listed before and still run a perfectly awesome game. Nevertheless, your style is yours alone. It is from your experiences, travel, politics, beliefs, and all of those and more will be influencing how you run your game. So, run your RPG the way you want as long as everyone is having a fun time. All of these styles excel at different things, and no one style, like I've said, is good or bad. And to be honest, these styles are not hard sciences. There might be more than I even considered. If so, let me know what you think about your own GM style down below in the comment section.